Hi gentlemen, hope you have a well-rested break so far. Apologies for uploading this video later than expected. But for this video on 7.2, our main focus is really to understand the different structure and function of the respiratory system. So two parts to this, the structure and function, as well as how gases are exchanged in our respiratory system. So two parts to this. Let's first dive into the human respiratory system first. So the main objective of the human respiratory system is to take in oxygen for aerobic respiration and to remove carbon dioxide, which is a waste product that is being produced during aerobic respiration. I emphasize on the word aerobic respiration right now. So oxygen is not only it is not very clear if you say oxygen is used for respiration, but oxygen is only used for aerobic respiration. Now that we have learned two types of respiration, it's important to differentiate between aerobic and anaerobic. Alright, so something to take note on this. So let's begin starting with the nasal cavity. Alright, you can pause the video for a little bit to take down the different labels of the structures involved in respiratory system. Alright, so let me briefly go through each part before I dive in deeper to each of the structure and function of the respective respiratory structures. So your nasal cavity is the starting point of respiratory system to take in and remove gases. Alright, oxygen and carbon dioxide, but it does not differentiate. It takes in all the air into your respiratory system, and your respiratory system will do the work to process it accordingly. Your pharynx, it's also known as the throat. Alright, at your pharynx, alright, your throat, two components are being separated. One is food and the other is air. Alright, so these two things will pass through your throat, but through into different structure in your body. So let's recall, alright, after the food passes through your pharynx, your throat, what is the next structure that it goes into? It's actually the esophagus. Right, so because this is part of your digestive system. So you can see that your esophagus, all right, the part where food goes down into is actually at the back of your body, all right? And then the air, right, air that passes through your throat will actually head down to the larynx, which is actually your voice box. So for men, right, it's really obvious. You could put your fingers over your Adam apples right now, and that's where your larynx is. All right, try talking, try humming, try making some sounds right now, and you can feel that feel the vibration over your voice box. It's because when the air passes through, all right, the vibration is the one that helps in voice projection. To help you out in visualizing the difference between pharynx and larynx before we enter the trachea, let's watch a little animation to find out a little bit more.
Headache at the worst moment? Get fast relief with Nurofen Express.
Pharynx. The pharynx is the opening behind the nose and mouth and is part of both the respiratory and digestive systems. Both food and air pass through the pharynx. The pharynx ends in the esophagus and the larynx. Larynx. The larynx is also known as the voice box because it contains the vocal cords and the different muscles used in producing sounds. The epiglottis, a cartilage found at the top of the larynx, prevents food and water from entering the windpipe and the lungs.
Alright, so I hope this was helpful in understanding the positioning of the pharynx and larynx and what are the functions that it serves as well. So one thing that I want to point out from the video is the position of the epiglottis over here. Alright, so the epiglottis, epiglottis is a flap, that helps to differentiate the food and the air so that you don't choke on yourself. So sometimes you experience choking as you are talking and eating at the same time. It's because the food goes into the wrong pipe, causing you to cough very vigorously to expel the food that has gone into your larynx by accident. Alright, next comes the trachea, which is the main windpipe, commonly known as the windpipe. That will be broken into two segments that will each lead to one part of your lungs. Alright, and it's separate into two bronchi, bronchus for singular. Alright, and then it will further branch into smaller branches known as the bronchioles. Right, before it ends with a cluster of alveoli at the end. So what are alveoli? It's all this green clusters, alright, also known as the air sac, where gaseous exchange actually takes place. Alright, so let us dive deeper into the different segments. I'll come back to the trachea as well as the different cells that are found along the lining. So just take note of the two different cells that can be found along your respiratory lining, mainly along your trachea and bronchi, where you can find these two kinds of cells. Alright, the gland cell focuses on producing mucus, whereas the other epithelial cell, more specifically ciliated cells. So some of these cells that are found along the lining are known as ciliated cells. So what is the difference between ciliated cells and gland cells? Alright, some gland cells only focuses on producing mucus, as you can see over here shaded in red. Whereas for ciliated cells, at the end of the cells, you will find this hair-like structure. Hair-like projection that acts as a broom. Alright, to sweep the mucus that traps dust, bacteria, and other foreign substances, to sweep it up off the trachea instead of them entering your lungs. So this is a defense mechanism as well to protect your immunity. Alright, so now let's dive in deeper into each of the structure and understand the function that it plays. So starting with the nostril and nasal passage. Your nasal hair actually serves a very important purpose of trapping dust, foreign particles, and bacteria. This is the first line of defense, alright, to prevent foreign particles from entering your respiratory system. But sometimes not all are being trapped and removed, hence it explains why there are gland cells and ciliated cells found along your trachea and bronchi to further trap dust and remove mucus that have trapped all these foreign particles out of your respiratory system. Next, the nasal passage along your nasal cavity is actually lined with mucosal membrane, all right? Because along this membrane, right, mucus is produced, okay, to trap foreign particles. All right, let's do a little simple experiment right now. I want you to take in a deep breath of air and then let it out through your mouth while having your palm right in front of your mouth. All right, so take a deep breath and expel it out along your palm, and you feel that the air that is being expelled is actually warmer. Okay, let's try a few times until you are convinced. So why is that so? Right? Why is the expelled air actually warmer? It's because as air enters your respiratory system, it's being warmed and moistened before it enters your lungs. Okay, so that explains the difference in the temperature. And not just that, your sensory cells along your mucosal membrane also helps to detect harmful chemicals. All right, so it's a response, a reflex response to run away from any danger when the smell of harmful chemicals are being detected. That's the first nostril and nasal passage. Next, let's go into the trachea. All right, so where exactly is the trachea? It lies right in front of your esophagus. And it's lined with these rings of cartilage. In a bit, I'll be showing you actual sample of a cadaver and how does it look like. So what does this cartilage do is to keep the trachea open so that air can still go through it without any obstruction. All right, so I think now is the best time to show you the video of the trachea, and in this video you will also see the esophagus as well as the pharynx and larynx.
Let me show you something really awesome about your trachea or your windpipe. But just to orient you, if you've never seen this before, this is your larynx or your Adam's apple, and posterior to all this is the esophagus or the food tube, which will transport food down to the stomach. But if you look closely at your trachea or your windpipe, you can see these cartilaginous rings stacked on top of each other. Now they're not full rings, they're actually more like the letter C. They don't come back to get fully together in the back. And this fibromuscular membrane and the fact that these cartilaginous rings don't come fully together do allow some change of shape for your windpipe when you're inhaling and exhaling, but they still provide enough rigidity that your airway won't collapse, especially when you're sucking in air or inhaling deeply.
All right, so a better picture of a top-down view is over here. So the cartilage that was being pointed out is actually C-shaped. It's not a complete ring of cartilage. All right, this is because it gives some space. So let me just highlight to you the C-shaped cartilage over here. Right, that holds up the trachea, gives it its shape so that it does not collapse, while there is some room, okay, for it to expand a little, especially when one is taking a deep breath of air. All right, and then the trachea will divide further into two tubes known as the bronchi over here, which I have circled in green. And then each of the bronchi divides repeatedly into smaller branches known as the bronchioles, which I have circled in red. And then it will end in a cluster of air sac, which I have circled over here in green. So using a flow chart to reflect the movement of air from the nasal cavity all the way down, this is how it would look like. It would be good for you to take it down at the side as well. All right, so it starts off with the nasal cavity, followed by your pharynx, which is your throat, sorry, there's a spelling error right there. It's PHARNYX. Okay, and then it will go down to your voice box where voice projection occurs before it enters the trachea, which is further divided into two bronchi, that is further divided into bronchioles, and ends off in the air sac known as the alveoli. Let me turn your attention to the two different cells that I briefly mentioned in the earlier part of the video. So along your trachea and bronchi lies an epithelium, all right, a layer of cell, if that's something that it's easier for you to appreciate. Okay, so along this membrane, there is a layer of cells made up of two types of cells. The first is gland cells, and the second is ciliated cells. So what it does is that the gland cell will focus on producing mucus, while the ciliated cells have hair-like structure known as cilia, okay, that will act as a broom to sweep the dust particle upwards into your pharynx. All right, which is sometimes which you sometimes expelled it in the toilet, into the sink, or sometimes you merely swallow it down into your esophagus. I know it's disgusting, but now that you know what is found inside what you commonly known as phlegm, it's a mixture of mucus as well as all the foreign particles, bacteria and dust particles. I think you will now think twice before swallowing into your esophagus, and you will choose to go to the toilet to expel it out instead. All right. Okay, so if it helps you over here, okay, the pinkish substance is actually the mucus, whereas the hair-like structure that is found along your epithelium is the cilia. And that marks the end of all the important respiratory structure and function that you need to know. We'll now move on to the structural adaptation of the alveolus. We'll zoom in to see how exactly each air sac look like in the next segment before we talk about gaseous exchange. So this picture over here, it's really helpful as you can see. All right, so let me just orientate you a little bit. Okay, so at the end of each bronchiole, all right, is this grape-like structure. It's like a bunch of grape at the end of each bronchiole. All right, and this alveoli is actually surrounded with a lot of capillaries, okay, to facilitate the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, so that it can be removed and directed back to the heart, so that it can be removed when you breathe out. So what are some of the structural adaptation of the alveoli in lungs that make it useful in terms of gaseous exchange? So four factors to take note of. Number one, the presence of numerous alveoli. There are just 1,000 over alveoli in both of your lungs, which helps to provide a large surface area for gaseous exchange. I can illustrate in this very simple picture over here. All right, if at the end of each bronchiole is just one ginormous alveolus versus the end of each bronchiole with multiple alveoli that actually resembles a grape-like structure, it actually provides more surface area even in between for oxygen and carbon dioxide to be exchanged, as compared to one large alveolus at the end of each bronchiole. So I hope you can visualize what I'm trying to illustrate over here for the first point of providing a large surface area for gaseous exchange. Number two, the wall of the alveoli is being supplied with a network of blood capillary. Alright, so the constant flow of blood through the blood capillary maintains a steep concentration gradient for gases to diffuse faster. Number 2, the wall of the alveolus is actually very, very thin. Alright, it's actually only 1 cell thick. Let's take a look at this cross section over here. So over here you will see, okay, one alveolus, and you can see that it has a very thin 1 cell thick wall in order for exchange of gas to happen very quickly between the alveolar cavity as well as the blood capillary. Okay, I'll show a little video later on for you to appreciate the exchange. Alright, so what is the purpose of having such a thin wall? Is to shorten the diffusion distance for faster rate of exchange of gas between the alveoli as well as the blood capillary. Alright, and not just that, it also has a thin film of moisture found in the surface of the alveolus, where oxygen will dissolve in it before diffusing across the wall of the alveolus. How does that happen? Let me show you with a video.
The lungs are a pair of spongy organs. In each lung, the bronchus branches into bronchioles. The bronchioles end in a large number of cup-like structures called air sacs. The air sacs are surrounded by a network of capillaries. Gas exchange takes place between the air in the air sacs and the blood in the capillaries. When we breathe in, inhaled air flows through the respiratory tract into the air sac. Oxygen in the inhaled air dissolves in the water film, lining the air sac. Since the oxygen concentration in the water film is higher than that in the blood, oxygen diffuses across the walls of the air sac and the capillaries into the red blood cells. At the same time, since carbon dioxide concentration in the blood is higher than that in the water film, carbon dioxide in the blood diffuses across the wall of the capillaries and the air sac into the water film, and then into the air in the air sac, and is finally exhaled.
Alright, I really love all the animation from this particular channel, Oxford Mastering Biology. So I do recommend you to save it on YouTube and refer to it for any structure and processes that you may find a bit unfamiliar, and the animations will help you to better visualize it. Alright, so the last part, it's how gaseous exchange happen between the alveolus and blood, and I've broken down into 4 steps with reference to figure 2 above over here. So let me run through briefly first using the diagram before I show you in text the 4 different steps. Right, to help me out, I would need a little bit more space over here. So let me just remove the drawing over here. Alright, so let's take a look at how gaseous exchange occur between the alveolus as well as the blood capillary. So when air is taken in, oxygen-rich air will first enter the cavity, right, which is the empty space inside each alveolus. First thing first, it will dissolve into this thin film of moisture, alright, as dissolved oxygen. So I'll pause here with just a quick question. Why must oxygen dissolve in the thin film of moisture before it gets diffused across and into the red blood cell? I'd like you to think and ponder with your knowledge of movement of substances, why must the oxygen dissolve in a thin film of moisture instead of just moving across? Right, so after dissolving, there is a high O2 concentration in the thin film of moisture as compared to the red blood cells. So low concentration of oxygen. All right, this creates a concentration gradient. All right, for the diffusion of oxygen from the alveolus cavity across the wall of the alveolar, all right, and then across the capillary wall, and then into the red blood cells. And then in the red blood cells, what happens to the oxygen? I'll pause here for a quick question as well. What happens to the oxygen upon entering the blood capillary? If you answered, it will combine reversibly with the hemoglobin. You are actually right. So in step number 3, all right, oxygen will combine with hemoglobin, okay, to give you oxyhemoglobin that will be transported around to the rest of the body, and it's a reversible process. So when oxygen is needed, the oxygen will dissociate from the hemoglobin to give you oxygen that will be transported to other body cells. And then at the same time, what gas is being brought back by the red blood cell? That would be carbon dioxide. So there is a high concentration of carbon dioxide in the red blood cell that's returning from the heart. Okay, so this is from heart, all right, as compared to the low CO2 concentration in the alveoli, which also establish a concentration gradient of CO2 for diffusion to occur. Alright, so this is what happens inside the alveolus. And to wrap it up with the 4-step in text, let me just show you over here. Alright, so to summarize, firstly, oxygen taken in will first dissolved in the thin film of moisture. Next, the dissolved oxygen will diffuse across and into the red blood cell. It will pass through different walls, the wall of alveolus and the wall of blood capillary. And then in red blood cells, it will combine with hemoglobin to form oxyhemoglobin, and due to aerobic respiration. All right, due to carbon dioxide is being produced that will diffuse into the alveolar air and being expelled when we breathe out. That's all for this video. I hope you find some time to familiarize yourself with the different parts of the respiratory system and try out the checkpoint questions at the back, which I will go through when we resume lessons in school. Alright, so if there's any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll see you back in school in a bit, I think in about 2 weeks time. Alright, take care.